didn't get coffee.
Man,
Oh,
that's a tough start right there.
no
No
coffee.
worries.
But it's the middle of the day for you.
Yeah, it's 3 o'clock. I guess it's
Yeah.
justified not to have one. I just
Oh,
saw you
yeah.
having one. I was like, oh, I would love a coffee.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are excited. We've got a new guest on this week, Mr. Nathan Bird, founder, CEO of Bird Box Coaching, also runs the Gymnastics Course, and he's going to be with us at Affiliate Con. God, I can't believe it's already happening at the end of this month. So if you guys don't have your tickets or you aren't signed up and aren't planning to go yet, make sure you make it happen. We got James in the house. So Nathan, man, welcome, dude. Excited to have you.
Thanks very much.
Tell us, I'm so curious about both of these things, but I'm going to start with the Gymnastics Course because like that was one of the CrossFit like in-house SME courses. And so how did you get involved with it and how did you end up with it?
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a coach, I was living in the Middle East. I was coaching in CrossFit gyms in the Middle East. When I met the Gymnastics Course, I was in Kuwait at the time. And that's when I first met it. Opportunity came up to be able to work with the Gymnastics Course, and I made the decision to move back to Europe because there's increased opportunities to work with them at that point in Europe than there would have been in the Middle East, just because of regularity and also travel and availability. I basically went immediately into a lead role. So went into a lead role, leading the seminars, traveling for the seminars, which was then international travel. As I did that, I didn't actually get much feedback, any support, direction in terms of coaching. There was just, this is the material and off you go. However, the standardized material across a couple of leads was variant. So therefore, I took it on myself to then expand my knowledge in terms of education, further than what I'd done previously, more to be able to direct myself and build into elements of what the course is. I use this as part of an explanation on Bird Box coaching development in terms of reflection reports and why it's important to do it. And I explained with the situation that I had in Russia, and basically I was in Russia and had an outburst from a Russian participant that was translated quite aggressively into my ear. But in terms of what happened was that I can completely empathize why he was finding the situation difficult in the course, being a 6'8" guy, super muscle bulked, heavy guy, doing a position at the end of the course, which was an L-sit, a foundational position. And it was at the end of the very course. And it made me critically reflect. And I went through a Gibbs cycle of reflection on that and identified why it was difficult for him. But more importantly, did I set the standard of that he was going to understand it was going to be difficult? And it further went round to being, actually, I critically analysed the course material at that point. I identified that L-sit and V-sit is more of a foundational structural movement that should be close to the hollow arc at the beginning of our seminars. And that led to some shifts and change in the course material. And so then I started making the shifts and change in the course material. And then the main thing that led to my development of having the course myself was the license agreement changes that CrossFit decided to do. And so the license agreement changes, originally it was CrossFit Gymnastics, and then they went, okay, we're going to be a CrossFit approved course. No, a CrossFit preferred course. And when that situation happened, the original owner was Jeff Tucker, and he asked me to come in. We spoke about the situation. He asked me if I was doing it. I was like, well, of course I am, because all I want to do is just carry on coaching. Not understanding at that time that really internationally, the only real location that was making profit because of looking after travel margins and also positive sales was mainly European market. And so then at that point, Tucker made a deal where he's like, okay, you run basically international, I run the US, which was then a counter proposal for me to do it with a colleague, Chuck Bennington. Okay. We continued to do that through the preferred license, and then Tucker completely drifted himself out around the COVID period. So then it ended up the two of us, and then from that, the course material was refined further. Chuck then took a step back, and then it ended up being myself running everything with a complete redevelopment of course material, and the staff being developed internationally. So we have a larger staff than we've ever had. We run more seminars per weekend than we've ever done. But the material is really refined in terms of taking evidence from sports science and academia, and implementing it to a coaches on a coaching perspective, but also an athlete perspective. So it's very different to then doing a gymnastics camp. It's very different to doing just a weekend workshop. It's something that's progressive and developmental to people to then be able to learn and actually take away and put into practice.
So tell me more about that. Is it geared? So it sounds like it's geared to both athletes and coaches. And so is there takeaways on both sides of things? Obviously, as the athletes that are doing the drills, but then like you guys give coaching advice and direction as well.
I would say it's predominantly heavily focused towards coaches. However, the way it's provided and delivered, it is accessible to athletes and to coaches. We never shut the door to athletes. Our perspective is that, let's say, for instance, there is a part on the course where we may talk about coaching styles, or we might start talking about self-talk, for example. These elements would have a relevance, and programming is another example. These elements would have a relevance to those people who are in the room just as an athlete. So if we were to say that to a coach, we would rather you use external coaching cues. And as you use external coaching cues, because research has told us this, we provide the research evidence. So we use an example of Romanian gymnasts that were given internal, external coaching cues, which were better and why, and how to then triangulate those external coaching cues by using metaphors and metaphor triangulation. And so then what we're doing is, okay, that sounds maybe at the first stage quite deep for an athlete to learn, but what it does, it teaches an athlete how to think in their mind about how to approach the movement, or what they should be thinking in their head as a positive self-talk within the movement. And it gives them a clearer direction as an athlete and not just the coach. And therefore also it makes these athletes more coachable for when they are coached by their main coach.
Nathan, can you give an example of an external versus an internal coaching cue?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so if I was to say to you, I want you to jump as high as you can and land softly. This is a generic coaching cue. But if I was to say, I want you to jump as high as you can by squeezing your quads hard, and when you land, I want you to bend your knees and ankles to receive the landing softly. That would be internal. However, if I was to say, I want you to get your head through the ceiling, and then I want you to imagine you're landing on a sheet of ice, this would then be an external.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Now, what's your background in? Did you have background in gymnastics, and is that what drew you to this in general?
I did gymnastics as a kid, but I actually stopped gymnastics because my rugby coach turned around to me and says, "You've got to stop dancing, come play full-time rugby." That was the effect of his words. As a kid, I did many different sports. I played football, athletics, rugby, cricket. Like I would expose myself to as many different sports as I could. I think about the age of 12 to 13, my football coach turned around to me and was like, you can make it if you just stop doing all the other sports. But because of the culture and the way it was presented and the way the coaches were, it really put me off and pushed me away. However, it was about 1 year later that my rugby coach had a similar discussion with me. But my rugby coach at the time was a SBS, so special boat service, like SAS, but SBS. Very well presented, well articulated, was a good leader, and the way he presented that was completely different. And so for me, I was like, okay, I'll follow that pursuit. However, that pursuit ended with me with a break in my leg and having 4 surgeries,
Oh, no.
which was basically the end of my athletic career in direction. But it gave me good redirection on how I can then coach and help others.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. That's too bad that it all ended that way. But like you said, I guess it ended in the right way and worked out for you pretty darn well anyways.
That's right.
So I know, and we work with a lot of coaches, and gymnastics movements, scaling gymnastics movements, coaching a wide variety of skill levels in a single class on some of the more complex gymnastics movements is always one of the big challenges for coaches. How do you guys approach that? What tools do you give coaches at your gymnastics courses?
Okay. So it integrates across from coaching development to the gymnastics course, and part of the integration of how we coach people is integrated from Bird Box to TGC. And a part of that is thinking like a coach, and that's identifying the issues and the limitations, and what they actually would need from there. We hear these things of like progressions, skills and drills, but if we actually critically reflect and look at how effective they've been through the community, we can then start to think, well, what do these people actually need? So then we can then start to identify, is this a mobility issue? Is it a strength issue? But we actually break that down further. So we say it's a mechanical issue, a structural issue, or a strength issue. Mechanical may be like, for instance, a physical block. Where I said I broke my leg, I've had 4 surgeries on my ankle. I actually have a physical calcified block within that ankle, and I have to do what I can to manage around it. However, someone who can't lock out their elbow above their head, but can lock their elbow out in front of them, that's not a mechanical block at the elbow joint, but that is a limitation, a structural issue where there's tension through the shoulder, poor range of motion at the shoulder, where the thoracic spine into extension with the scapulothoracic area is a relationship to the shoulder. That's the actual block which is happening to the elbow. So therefore, it's a structural issue that we would need to make a change to. Or potentially it's just a limited factor of strength and that the athlete needs to be stronger. So then we talk about strength approaches in terms of using different contractions, using isometric, eccentric, and concentric contractions as tools, knowing that we're going to create muscle architecture changes. So muscle architecture changes in terms of eccentric loading could be increased fascicle length, pronation angle, cross-sectional area, or increased neurological adaptations to actually increase motor unit recruitment. So we talk about that as a process first, rather than just going, hey, you want to achieve this movement, here's that drill. You want to achieve this movement, it's a very different approach to that. Then when we come down to break it down, we look at in consideration of tempo, time under tension, and we look at then contractions, and then how we change that by changing levers. So example would be, let's say for instance, someone wants to achieve a strict toes to bar. Not many members have a strict toes to bar, but they are kipping toes to bar. We set out rules and laws on the course. So one would be static before dynamic. So you'll be doing stuff on the floor, then the bar, then the rings. Strict before kipping. We expect to see a strict pull-up before a kipping pull-up. But that also means a set standard of mastery. That's where the eccentric and the concentric, so the upward phase and the downward phase, look identically the same in terms of a strict movement. We will build an isometric base, so there's support and stability within these positions, and then develop the strength and position awareness with eccentric loading contractions. This is our development to those shapes. So if we want to hit a strict toes to bar, again, which not many members do because it's not being coached to that standard, we then need to consider, well, how can we break this down? We can look at like high intensity, low volume, high intensity, or we can look at the moderation between the two. So if we take strict toes to bar as being high intensity in terms of the contractile strength and the force that's needed, we would then do potentially lower sets and reps, so 5x5, 3x5, but with tempo control, and even spotting could potentially be the best form of scaling at this stage to learn that position and to develop that strength. But on the alternative, then we can go to like a simple V up. So we're looking at tension and compression. We're going to call that the lowest intensity. So therefore it's going to be at a higher volume. Maybe 6 sets to 25 reps would be the approach of this. So it's getting a high exposure. If the athlete struggles there, then they're going to have to do tuck ups. If they still struggle there, we'll have to build the isometric base, which means it could be tuck hollow, one leg straight hollow, development into hollow, or it could just be literally simple planks at that point. And then
so is that where the static before dynamic would come into play?
Static before dynamic is in relation to the apparatus. So I wouldn't get an athlete onto the rings unless they can do movements well on the bar first.
Okay.
So if they want to be able to do like for instance, a bar muscle up, they should ideally be able to do a ring muscle up. They should be able to go into a bar muscle up prior to that. To be able to go into a bar muscle up, we would like to see a pullover. So there is a strict controlled pullover. And so there's a couple of like set standards of development so that we know that the athlete's not at increased risk moving from a static apparatus to a dynamic apparatus. But in terms of that would be building an isometric base as part of that rule so that they can do the isometric contractions first to then develop eccentric. So let's say they can't do that V up. They would do tuck hold in isometric holds or planks, so isometric contractions. Then they would go through eccentric contractions, so like an eccentric sit up, which is very different than doing like, for instance, an eccentric controlled GHD, because posterior pelvic tilt, anterior pelvic tilt are different. We're keeping the rib cage down instead of opening the rib cage up. So there's a control of just maintaining rib cage down, posterior pelvic tilt in terms of hollow position development. And then when we come back to that toes to bar, in terms of moderate intensity and moderate volume, what we can be looking at is something where like you change the angle of lever. So instead of reducing the range of motion, we change angle of lever. So the way we present this on the course would be we take a barbell, or you can take those road pull-up bars for children, but putting the barbell down on the JPEGs and then tying it on the band so we know it's fixed safely. Putting a box slightly behind, putting a bench off the box so we keep a decline angle of the box. A preferred method with this would be using a bench off stool bars that you would have seen in like my area, like gymnastics as a kid, like 4-year-old gymnastics, where you got those, you have to walk up the bench and go up the ladders on the wall, that kind of stuff. That would be a preferred method, really. But what we can do is we create that within our CrossFit box. And from that, what we've done is we've changed the angle of the lever, but the athlete has the ability to still have hand position locked out with good grip on the bar. They'll still be able to have their ear in line with their arm. They'll still be able to go active shoulder, and they will be able to compress full range toes to bar. And we're going to call it moderate intensity, moderate volume, so that they get the training adaptations. There's gravity force going through them, and that we'll be doing something like 5-6 sets of 8 to 10. And if we take an alternative like thing that we may see within the community is something like taking a kettlebell, taking a dumbbell, holding a rig, and then they bring their toes to that position. If we critically analyze what's actually happening in that position is, when you start bringing the feet off the floor, there's gravitational force against those feet. And as we continue to go up, as soon as you come to that 90-degree angle, there's no gravitational force and no compression force at that point. As we keep going past that 90-degree angle, then there's starting to be some compression where the athlete pulls themselves down in. So there's a little bit of development there. What you end up with this space is no strength and no positional development. And so then when people come back to the pull-up bars after been doing that scale on the floor, yes, they've been scaling the task of making them feel like they've been doing reps, which are towards the task of the goal, but they've not got any development in terms of positional strength or awareness, so that they can't get better at the toes to bar, which they wish to get. So then they're lacking that strength and positional development. And hopefully that's like a contextualization to understand the difference between scaling and the objective of task and actually controlling contraction of strength and having the principles behind us to be able to get people to move better.
Yeah, I like that drill and the box and the bench and the kids bar and all that kind of stuff. That makes so much sense. And you're absolutely, like, I totally get the doing the version of on the ground and how it doesn't really translate. I think the challenge is a lot of times for coaches is like, I love it. That's a lot of gear. I got 16 people in class, 3 of them can barely hang on the bar, 6 of them can do toes to bar, kipping, no problem. How do I make this actionable? How do I do this in a way and put this into my regular class plan to where it's like I'm not spending a bunch of time setting up equipment? Obviously, I think bringing stuff out before class makes sense there, but it's like, hey, if I've got that equipment here, that's taking away a big portion of my rig, which I might need for people to do in the workout. It's like, how do we make this happen in a regular class?
So one real way to answer that question for you is to then one directly ask 2 questions back. One would be, what's the coaching philosophy? What guides you in your coaching? Because CrossFit's a methodology and not a philosophy. You need a coaching philosophy. And in that part of the coaching philosophy, you had predetermined leadership styles, but also what you'll have is different coaching styles. Now, how many different coaching styles has CrossFit level 1, 2, 3, and 4 taught you? Now, this is not a negative analysis. This is just a perspective analysis, because we always support the level 1, 2, 3, 4 process. They have to go through it as a minimum standard. But if we critically reflect, how many coaching styles does level 1, 2, 3, 4 teach? Autocratic coaching, 1. So therefore, the coach at this point only has one real coaching style that have available to coach to them. So then we would then have to consider, well, what do these different people need? They're at different stages of learning. We've got cognitive learners, we've got associative learners, and we've got autonomous learners, as you just explained. So those cognitive stage learners, they may have, like you said, have no ability to hang on the bar. And therefore, they do need our connection and our ability, but they need to go through just the movement to learn what's going on to become more competent as a cognitive stage learner. So at that point, they potentially just need positive reinforcement and a growth mindset towards being able to do that. And their scale simply on the floor. Now, if, let's say, for instance, you're at the associative stage of learning, and then the athlete's starting to understand what they're doing. If we use autocratic coaching at that stage, we're maintaining them to almost stay in the cognitive stage of learning, because we're telling them what to do and when to do it. Because we're removing autonomy, they have no autonomy in their development, and then we need to develop their competence, but we're always scaling them down. So therefore, we need to then bring them into the decision-making process, see what they want to do, and as long as they understand the principle at that point, how they can then get better. So then a part of that would be, well, ideally, that might only be 3-4 people who might be on the box, the bench, and the bar on the decline going through that repetition. Now, alternatively, if you don't have the space for that, there may be an adaptation to the workout in terms of what that person really wants to get. They want to get to develop to a strict toes to bar to eventually get to a kipping toes to bar. Well, we've also previously mentioned that the best form of scaling is potentially going to be spotting. So for instance, in the past, I've done workouts like Nicole, where it's a 400-meter run, max effort pull-ups. one of the simplest approaches there is to buddy up someone so that they go into reciprocal coaching and use a reciprocal form of coaching so that they work with somebody. They do the 400-meter run together, and by enforcing that, I would make them run just holding a band, so there's like a team workout. But then when they come back in, it's partner number 1 does max effort pull-ups spotted from the waist, and partner number 2 does max effort pull-ups spotted from the waist. They're strict pull-ups, so they're getting the adaptation control. It may be that they decide between them, they give more support on the concentric and less support on the eccentric, and they get to morally support and push each other as they go through that. So you could do the same approach on the strict toes to bar at this point. Then you can then start looking at bringing on the bar. If they haven't got a strict toes to bar yet, but they got the beat swing down, we can start looking at like segmenting the way we break it down. So let's say it was 15 toes to bar. It may be 1 strict toes to bar as high as they possibly can with a 3-second pause at the top. This will be their target line. And we're expecting that target line to descend over the workout. Let's say it's 5 rounds. Because they're going to be fatigued. Well, that can be a reset target on each round. And then once they hit that line, they hit that 3-second pause and they do the eccentric control for 3 seconds. They then go through 5 beat swings and then 5 toes to bar, but to the line of the height that they achieved on that isometric hold. So that they've got a development phase there, and they know that their workout is a developmental progress rather than always performance to the task. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to assume that this approach and this concept is what you guys cover in your Bird Box seminars. Is that right?
We cover parts of it, yeah, and it depends. Really, Bird Box we have a set course material that we go through, but it also gets dictated on how we deliver it for the discussions that come in the room. So therefore, if the question is specifically about that, then we will cover that discussion, but we may change it. We do have a level 2 course on Bird Box. This is very much focused on interventions. So for instance, in sports psychology, that you would provide an intervention. An intervention isn't something where we intervene and make it, it's where we provide a change for a positive development. And so then also in terms of exercise coaching, we want to be able to then provide interventions to movement quality so that people have the ability to move to mastery. So then at this stage, when we have an intervention, a lot of that course is developed of interventions. Many people go away and want to put it into practice, but they ask how. And then we start to then discuss culture. And we use an acronym called TARGET, which is actually written by Epstein in 1989. So like a gold standard year, I normally tell the group at that point, because it's the best people were born in 89 anyway.
1989, yeah. Nathan, really quick, before you go into Target, I've gotten a request for you to
please, sure.
your video or your camera, just so you're a little more centered in the screen. So just, there we go. Perfect.
Magic. Sorry.
Thank you. Let me throw this up too, just to give this shout out. I threw it up, but I just don't want you to miss it. One of the best things we took away from the course was establishing our coaching philosophy amongst our staff. So pretty cool. Yeah.
Super cool. That's Kanan.
Yeah. So tell us more about that. How do you help coaches come up with a coaching philosophy? And tell us like the different philosophies. Yeah.
We guide them that they have to have underpinning knowledge and evidence to guide that principle, and we provide some of those things through the weekend. And then it comes through 5 like guiding questions, but basically it starts with like, what are your morals, your ethics, and your values? Like, have you written them down? Now, I know some people write these down. I know they write them as course, as businesses as well for gyms. So we're not naive to that. But in terms of a coaching philosophy, we don't see it often coming very much. Then from developing these kind of 3 elements, you start to develop into a mission statement. What do you want to achieve? And what's your clear goal towards that? From developing a mission statement, then we start to look at going into what our leadership styles are. Now, if you've not studied leadership styles, then potentially you've got no clear direction to write a coaching philosophy. So the first question to the coach would be, hey, what leadership styles are guiding your practice to provide CrossFit? And they'll go like, constantly very functional movements, high intensity. I'm like, very good. You've explained the methodology, but what's the coaching philosophy? So to give you an example, in terms of leadership styles, we present 2 key leadership styles through Bird Box. Now, the reason why we present these 2 is because it's part of my coaching philosophy. It's the easiest thing for me to present. And then we explain, look, there's other like leadership styles out there. Please don't have to take this. If you like it, then feel free to, but go and explore it. If you've come from business, where we know some box owners and some coaches that come from business backgrounds, and they may have learned leadership in a different dynamic, it may guide them on how they want to actually be a coach. So the two that we present normally are transformational coaching, and we also present multidimensional leadership of sport. Now, the reason why we present these two, everyone comes to the coaching development course and even TGC because they want to be more effective as coaches. And therefore, we have to go off references rather than making stuff up. So we've got different references that we pull in. The first one is that coaches are blissfully unaware of their own interactions. A better perceiver of a coach's actual actions are the peer coaches or the athletes that they're working with. And so we always highlight that quite well. So basically, you might think you're fantastic, but if we want to know if you are or not, we could talk to your peer coaches, we could talk to your athletes, but actually, in the simplest term, we can just come to your box and look at how people move. Because if they don't move with mastery, then we know no coaching's happened. Now, on that point, we could actually potentially say, and people can question themselves, what percentage of their members can move with mastery? And let's take the back squat. We've asked this question at affiliate gatherings before, and I probably will poke the bear and ask this in Dallas, I reckon, at some point, so people can critically review it in advance. But if we were to say 5x5 back squat is not a maximal test, it's going to be like 85% of their maximum load. Therefore, it's not their maximum. What percentage of their members can do 5x5 back squat with mastery? Now, we have to define mastery better for them to be able to answer. We're going to say that mastery is the eccentric and the concentric movement will visually be identically the same. That means that all joints moving well, when they go down, they are stronger on the eccentric contraction than they are the concentric contraction. Therefore, the way up must look exactly the same as the way down. So if you see an athlete going down in good shape, but then their butt shifts backwards or their knees squeeze in, or you get these abnormalities, or they lift with their thoracic, or whatever the changes in the movement, this would not be classed as mastery. Now, 5x5 back squats is 25 reps, and I'll be generous. We'll say we're looking for 24 reps because I'm okay if you struggle on that last because there's
not one last rep.
Yeah, ideally 25 reps, but we also want to challenge them. So that 24th rep, that 25th rep is if the last set, the last 1 to 2 reps is challenged, then okay, we're getting good principles of training adaptations. But what percentage of members do we really perceive can do 5x5 back squat with mastery? And if they can't, why aren't they? Is it because we're not coaching it to that standard? Now, I've asked this at affiliate gatherings, for instance, in the UK, in Poland, in Netherlands. I've also asked it on seminars. And the average that we receive, so for instance, in the UK, I believe it was something between 500 and 800 boxes. 1 to 2% was the consensus. In Netherlands was also 1 to 2%. In Poland was 1%. I did a seminar in Chile. They perceived 70% somehow, but then by the time we finished the weekend, it came down to 1 to 2%. So remember, we're blissfully unaware of our own actions. So the question is really then, what's guiding us, and do we want to be more effective? And the way we then present that back is through transformational coaching. And the research tells us that you do not have to be transformational to be effective. However, if you strive to be transformational, you will become effective. If you are effective, you will become more effective. Transformational has 5 key elements: charisma, intellectual stimulation, individual consideration, inspiration, and charisma, intellectual stimulation, inspiration, individual considerations, and idolized influence. Now, idolized influence, that 5th one I just said, that's your coaching philosophy, the way you present forward. Now, if you don't have a coaching philosophy, you don't have the ability to be a transformational coach. You may be through charisma. And when we talk about charisma, we say that charisma is the emotional connection between the coach and the athlete, or the coach and the group of athletes. Now, we can break that down into 10 key elements, charisma. So for instance, hand gestures, how you purposefully use hand gestures. Like, it's really important to me that you guys, there's going to be 4 rounds in this workout instead of just being an Instagram conductor. So we can learn that specifically. And now when we do courses, when I come to do a course in the States, I'm like, charisma, tick. Good job, guys. You've nailed it. But then we get to like Scandinavia, Germany, Eastern Europe, and it's not that they don't have charisma. It's just it's different. It's presented different. So there's elements where some coaches really need to focus on it, and that's why I say the course material is flexible. Because if I do come to the States, I'm like, we'll still go through the principles because there's a couple of outliers in the room where they may need to develop it, but we'll spend less time on that. But in reverse, we'll spend more time on something else somewhere else. So charisma will be one, idolized influence. intellectual stimulation. Now, we provide understanding to motivation. We use self-determination theory provided by DC and Ryan. So we don't make it up, we reference it. And we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And in terms of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, we know that extrinsic motivation is not as strong as intrinsic motivation. And if you have an athlete who's strongly intrinsically motivated, and you provide them an extrinsic reward, then their intrinsic motivation will be diminished. Now, to achieve intrinsic motivation, we're looking for accomplishment, stimulus, in reverse, stimulus, accomplishment, and knowledge. Well, knowledge is the highest end of intrinsic motivation. So therefore, we should be providing intellectual stimulation, part of transformational coaching, to our athletes for them to really understand why and what they're doing. And instead of just autocratically telling them what to do, we start to provide the why. That may not come into the cognitive stage of learner, but when we get athletes into the associative and autonomous stage of learning, then we start to then build their why and increase their intrinsic motivation. Now, in terms of like theories of like leadership, there's also like social identity. My argument is CrossFit develops a very, very, very good social identity. That most of the social identity is, first of all, when the coach brings that person into the box and they develop a social identity with that individual. However, that social identity is really fostered and grown by the community itself, and it's not so much on the coach. The coach facilitates the start, but then it continues thereafter. But part of that social identity, and most of the coaching that's being received is autocratic and driven towards task, which would bring me back to the target acronym, is basically keeping people in the extrinsic motivation. They're looking for extrinsic reward. Are they going faster than someone else? What's the scores on the whiteboard? Have they lost their body weight? And that's most people's goals. So then when we reflect that to exercise adherence, or therefore you would relate that as a gym owner as your retainment, or like the keeping people in the gym, that's where we start to see numbers where people stay at CrossFit gym for potentially 6 months, 2 years, 3 years. And after that, they start to drop down. And suggestively, the thing that's missing is the next level to coach an associative autonomous stage learner, because we're going to have to use different coaching styles than autocratic coaching. And we have to relate to them on different elements, but we're also going to have to keep them in intrinsic motivation and not extrinsic motivation. So we'll be looking at the development pieces of that, how to be a more effective coach. That was a big for you, so I'll let you chat for that.
Yeah. I want to go back to one of the things you said a while ago, but it's like you make mention of your effectiveness is directly correlated with how well people move, right? And walking into a gym, you should see people move well. And I think, that's the direction that we push as well. It's like, we've said at level ones, it's like your air squat is your CrossFit handshake. It's like, you want to know how well you've been coached or do coach. It's like, how well do you actually move? And I know for myself, it's, if I had anybody, Glassman himself walk into the gym, I want him to look around at my athletes as they're moving and be impressed by how well they move. So I love the fact that that's what it all boils back to, which is interesting. We've got a question here from Allison, which is pretty cool. Let's see what we got. She says, what are the top changes, realizations coaches have when going through the Bird Box seminar?
Should I get a group of coaches to come on and give the answer for them? I can give you my perception to how I hope they perceive it and some of the feedback that I do gain back from them. However, again, a coach can be blissfully unaware of their own actions, and therefore I'll give you my perceptions. But if you want the true answer, and I think the best way is to get the true answer, you can go to birdboxcoaching.com and you can go onto our affiliate maps and you can see everyone who's done the seminar. So there's 1,000 people over there. And those are only people, they're not automatically put on there. So those are the people who've decided they want to be on there, not everyone who's ever done the course. Reach out to someone maybe who's in your local area so that then you can give you a real answer to that question. However, the top changes and realizations is potentially 1, the direction to have in their coaching philosophy, but how to make it. 2, the standards that they're applying. 3, the tools that they have available to them as a coach and where they want to go in their coaching. I would also say that at the end of every seminar, when we provide the seminar, we do give written feedback. So one of the course objectives is to increase your personal perspectives of the course, of yourself, personal perspectives of yourself. Now we do that through the course, we provide feedback through the course, but you do also get an in-detailed written email at the end of the seminar, personal to you. So part of that in that development is it can come in many levels. So I'll give you another example would be, we would ask the question, who are you? What's your nature? Now, we don't go much deeper than that on that question, because it might be that you do actually need a psychologist to go and answer some of them. We don't want to break them on the weekend and have to build them back up. But we do that one simple question. But then we go into, well, what's your personality? Do you understand personalities? If you don't understand personalities in your own time as a personality, then how can you understand others? And then you want to understand different personality types. Well, that means that we break it down. There's many different personality type of assessments. There you got like the big five in terms of the psychological big five, or you got the 16 breakdown where you're a giraffe, an elephant. We kind of keep it simple, and we just go through the disc profile of red, blue, green, yellow. And this way that you can remember it as a coach. You already know that red and yellow are faster thinkers, and green and blue are slower thinkers. It doesn't mean they're slow people, but like when you come into the gym, when we do registration, I'm like, hey, how you doing? And the red or yellow is like, fantastic, smashing it, thanks. And then the green and the blue, they're like, you can see them considering their answer before they give it to you. So you already know like red and green, blue, red and yellow, blue and green. So we can like separate that way. And then in terms of yellows, they are socially interactive. Greens are also socially interactive, but yellows are like the energy of the party. They're the high fives, the whooping, the cheering. They are normally trying to do the registration for me. And then we got, for instance, the greens. They are socially interactive, but one person, that close relationship. They want to build that social connection with a person, maybe two people, but quieter in a larger group and more individual with the different people. And then you get the reds, where they're more like autocratic, straight to the point, fast thinker. And then you've got the blues, which are detailed focused. They're slower thinkers and they're detailed focused. So sometimes we give the example of, for example, I am more of a red personality. I think fast, and so therefore I talk fast. I do have blue aspects to my personality, but predominantly red. Therefore, if I was to go and buy a new car today and they gave me paperwork to go and read, to sign and agree to, I will pick up the pen and I'll sign the paperwork, because my argument basically is, I know you're not going to give me the keys to the car and sell me the car unless I sign that paperwork. So this will save ourselves a lot of time and just sign the paperwork. As a blue personality, will pick up that paper and they will check through every page, which would drive a red personality nuts. Be like, just sign the paper. But they will then check through all the paperwork and then decide to make a signature at the bottom of it. Now, if you consider these different people who will come into your gyms, and you need to consider yourselves, if you don't know what personality you are, then how can you create adaptations in yourself to then be a better coach for those different people who are in front of you in that session? So if I was going to be a red personality, that blue person's not going to like it. And I'll be like, all right, the workout's fine, let's go. They're like, whoa, hang on a minute. How are we going to break this down? They want more information, they want more detail. And therefore, we need to coach people individually. And that's then individual considerations of transformational coaching. And then the other leadership element that we bring in is multidimensional leadership of sport. Now, that needs to, first of all, take considerations of you. So you need to know your personality, your nature, your traits, your reactions, behaviors, which goes in deeper, which we go through. But you also need to understand the situation, and you also need to understand the person. So the situation, for example, for me would be on a seminar, or it could be coaching in the gym. It could be that they're doing an outside coaching session, so it's a different situation. And then there will be preferred behavior, and then there will be required behavior. And your actual behavior is just you as the coach. And you need that preferred behavior and that required behavior to influence the actual behavior. And what we're actually focusing on is the outcome afterwards, which is satisfaction and performance. Now, if we take that in terms of sport, even look at some CrossFit Games athletes, for example, some of them are getting performance, but they're not having satisfaction. And some people are having satisfaction, but they're not having performance. And then we need to understand if we're being effective as coaches. So our determinant is going to be, are we effective in terms of, are they having satisfaction and are they increasing performance?
So I want to go back to the colors. How do individuals determine for themselves what color they are? And then how do we determine who our athletes are and where they fall into those categories?
Okay, so the real thing is personality testing. So we would then provide a simple personality test. When I was in the Middle East, we would then have a iPad on the side and we would give a personality test. It's part of the joining thing. So where you sign a PAR-Q form, you can add a personality test at the beginning. So then when you go and do fundamentals and then you do the on-ramp process, you might not be taking it, but you would give the coach to the next coach who's going to do on-ramp, and you'd be like, hey, here's so-and-so, they're red, or they're green, or they're, and you get that understanding how to connect with them immediately by understanding their personality. Now, as you do more, you first of all need to understand yourself, but as you do more, the way I explained it, I know I explained it fast, but you can really just break it down. Are they analytical, detail focus, or are they social? Are they fast or slow thinking? Those three questions will basically answer the split of the four for you. Now, you are generalizing, but that's perceptions, and you may be incorrect in your perceptions. So, for instance, people will present themselves different in environments when they first come in, and the way you'll have to change, and you have to watch it and you have to adjust yourself to it. But the way they might present them might be the way they want to receive their coaching that day. So therefore, you want to adapt and change that in place. A good example of that is on the seminar, I find it difficult to recognize red personality sometimes on the course. Now, over time, it took me maybe about 20, 30 seminars to start to identify, why are we not getting any red personalities on the seminar? And then I started to identify, we are. But with a red personality, where they're quite autocratic, direct to the point in a leadership position, when there's another red personality, potentially an alpha male, alpha red personality, and I'm not calling myself an alpha. What I am, though, is when I'm on the seminar, I'm in that leadership position.
Yep.
So I automatically take over that realm. And then those red personalities start to present themselves in different lights, maybe their secondary color. So therefore, if I was in the room where I'm not the leader at that point, potentially I'd come into a more analytical and detailed focused approach for me to be within that room with another red autocratic leader, if that makes sense. So then that's an adaptation. So it took me maybe 20 to 30 seminars to start realizing we're not having red personalities within the room. What actually is happening is that they're taking on different elements to themselves and presenting that because they don't have the opportunity to be that red leader at that period of time. And then occasionally you start to see it come in when you get them to do the coaching for their like assessment at that point and be like, he's red. It's just that he's been hidden by me for this day.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, is if you started to notice that red color come out a little more in like the smaller groups where they're able to interact with each other and you're not like right in the front leading everything.
Super interesting question. Now the answer is yes, but there's another part to that. And that's what we started to identify, is that we get people who come in and present that way. Because if we do, again, a critical reflection of what they've learned previously, they've only learned autocratic leadership, and that will then push to a more of a red style of coaching in terms of personality and the way they communicate. So again, it's not a negative criticism, it's just a process criticism. Level 1, 2, 3, 4 has taught the processes to exercise instruction of autocratic leadership. And therefore, what they perceive as the way they must coach every time is that one way. And therefore they will coach with a red personality. However, I've already done the assessment in terms of like talking to them and understanding them. And I'm like, you're a green personality coaching with a red personality type. You're not connecting your genuine self into your coaching. So therefore, the reason why you're getting stuck and you're struggling on some of these elements is you're not being your genuine self when you're coaching, and therefore people can't connect with you. So you can't develop a coach-athlete relationship. And one of our hierarchy pyramids at the beginning of the seminar says, if there's no coach-athlete relationship, no coaching can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's like we talk about authenticity and being like a bigger version of yourself, but finding ways to still be the genuine version of you when you're connecting and coaching with other people. So I like this. It's like digging into that a little bit more. I will say, Nathan, that you and I should never go car shopping together, because I don't think
you're going to read the paperwork, are you?
Yeah, you would not like to car shop with me for sure.
Amazing.
We've got a question here from Amit. Colors are good. How do we use that for cueing, like during a specific warm up when there's a big class? Does this come into play when we're on the floor with a group and we've got to do the thing with a whole bunch of different people at the same time?
So I'll answer in two ways. One is potentially, well, what are you? So then if you're a green or a blue personality and you're using autocratic leadership at that point, you potentially can have to go away and learn different coaching styles that suit you. That at some point in that session, you're going to use autocratic coaching. You need time management, you need control, you need authority. But then you need to then bring in some potentially democratic style of coaching. Now, that's just two which I've explained, but there's many others that we go through. Now, by going into democratic style of coaching, you allow the athlete to come into the decision-making process. In doing so, you're increasing their autonomy. So if we come back to self-determination theory and intrinsic motivation, we said the three things at the top. Well, that intrinsic motivation is made up of three key things. That's autonomy, relatedness, and competency. So those three things, if they don't have those three things, they can't have intrinsic motivation. So if you autocratically coach them and tell them what to do all the time, then they're not going to be able to get their intrinsic motivation. And so then you diminish that in terms of your coaching cues, and everything just falls flat. However, if they're potentially a red personality and they like just autocratic direction, tell them what to do, then it's going to be effective, then use it. But in terms of the others, you're potentially going to have to communicate, and then you're going to have to use more of a democratic style of coaching, whether it's reciprocal, divergent, whether it's guided learner, self-discovery, whether it's going to be laissez-faire, whatever the coaching style, that multiple lists can go on, whatever you want to then develop as a coach to use, then they can be more effective at that point. And then what we say is we use sensory coaching. Now we coach sensory coaching because an athlete can only feel, they can't see. So at a cognitive stage of learning, you will have to use the coaching cues as you've been provided, like knee out, hips back. They're going to have to do that. But at some point, they need to understand feeling because they can't see what they're doing. Therefore, we use sensory coaching. And therefore, when you come to those cues within a coaching session, we're looking for what we call punch cues. Punch cues are just that reiteration of what you've been doing with them to redirect them to the task position that you want. And again, they can only feel, they can't see what they're doing. So ideally it should be sensory, and it should be external, and it should have a metaphor in relation to it. And in terms of that sensory pyramid, we go through contact, balance, breath, tension, stillness, tension and smoothness. So stillness, tension, smoothness. It's a six-step pyramid, and you can't develop from one to the next. So a good example is, how many times do we see people's toes coming off the floor? You may hear a negative coaching cue, wiggle your toes. I've critically analysed that with old school level 1 staff, where I go, hey, why are we saying wiggle the toes? And they're like, well, the original message was wiggle your toes and then put your toes back on the floor to kind of drift the people out. And that's kind of fallen into just wiggle your toes, and you see people squatting with their toes in the sky. I'm like, great, that's perfect, because that explains why it was there. We should also critically analyse all our coaching cues. So another example of this would be knees out wide. It's a great cue. However, how many times do you see people driving their knees out wide and their foot peeling off the floor? The principle of driving the knee out wide is create torque. We go through 10 principles of biomechanics, and one of those principles of biomechanics is the principle of torque, when you drive the force away from the line of axes. So driving the knee out wide has 2 purposes: 1, opening the hip capsule; 2, to create torque. If the foot contact from the floor is peeled off, then we shouldn't even bother using that coaching cue, because we don't have contact. And without good contact, you can't get balance. And without balance, you can't go through the rest of the pyramid of sensory.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like there's some overcorrections, there's some things to get people where they want, but too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, and understanding where that comes into play and how that actually happens on the floor, and is it appropriate or not. For any of this stuff, right? Any teaching progression you use, any cue that you use, you can't just, this is why you just can't repeat all the things that you've seen other people do without any context on why you're doing it and what you expect to happen after the fact, right? It's like, I'm giving this cue because I want a change in your movement pattern. If I don't know what that change actually is, and what it looks like, and whether it's happening correctly or not, then clearly it's not going to be effective. I'm really curious to know how much of this are you going to be diving into? What exactly are you going to be presenting at Affiliate Con? Because I know we've got people listening that are excited to dig in more and hear what we're going to get at Affiliate Con.
Yeah, I'll throw this back up here from Nikki. Shout out there about the colors, and
hi, Nikki.
Stoked you're going to be at Affiliate Con. So yeah,
it'll be nice to see you again. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So Nikki and Gratian. I think I saw a lot of your like friends and family best out through Gratian and through Kanan as well. So like I seen like where you've got these really good pockets of like community. It's really cool to see your guys through that. Yeah. That's really cool. In terms of what I'll talk about there, to be perfectly honest, I believe I was sent something across like, hey, you want to talk about that? And I was like, I can talk about anything really, whatever you want me to do. Like I've got a vast content material, but it depends on like, I can also just turn up on the day and be like, hey guys, what do you want to know about? Like I'm very flexible at that point. But to be honest, like because of the level 2 material, I personally at the moment, I'm looking at going into the research of this acronym, basically of my perceptions of what CrossFit's providing, and where we want to redirect to, not changing for the cognitive stage learners and those new members come in, but potentially how we can affect climate and towards a motivational climate, and use that acronym of target. And basically it's showing that how we want to interact with those members to keep the retention of a member as they go through latter stages of development. Now I've considered that as a discussional piece. It can be quite deep. However, if people were rather a more simplistic approach, I've also considered showing thinking like a coach. Now, thinking like a coach is one of our whiteboards, how we get into sensory coaching. And so I've already explained to you where we've got basically mechanical structural strength. So it starts with a movement. I say to the people, what is CrossFit? And CrossFit's mechanics, consistency, intensity, and then you can go and say constantly very functional movements, high intensity. Because if you don't have the mechanics first, you can't go and chase that intensity. And so we want people to move better. Now, if they can't move better, the tools that they've been given previously, cue it. Knees out wide, chest up high, reach tool, whatever it's going to be. Then we can critically analyze, well, how often is that effective? Then we got constraints like wall squats. Now, if you're sitting someone against the wall, we're making them work hard. They're going to work hard towards the development, but we're not changing length or strength of muscle tissue. And therefore, this is where we use the word intervention. And at the top of the pyramid would be intervention. Interventions, like in psychology interventions, but in terms of training interventions, is where we want to change the length or strength of the muscle tissue to increase movement mastery. We need to then go to identification. So that's mechanics, consistency, intensity. Mechanics. Sorry, I've gone back around. Mechanical, structural strength. So we go mechanical. Is it like we explained with the elbow? Is it a structural issue, shoulder elbow relationship, or is it a strength issue? Let's say, for instance, they have a butt wink. It could be that their hamstrings are so tight where it sets into ischium, it's pulling the lumbopelvic region underneath them. That's tension through the hamstring, strength, lengthen through the hamstring, structural issue. However, if you then do a straight leg lift test on the floor, so we would need to understand assessments processes that we can use. If you do a straight leg lift test on the floor and they don't present a tight hamstring, but they still have a butt wink, it's telling us that they have a strength issue because the posterior chain isn't strong enough to hold them into a good squat mechanic. Well, what are we doing in terms of those interventions apart from doing more reps or more cues? So then we then go into the process of what interventions we're going to use. We will either do mobility, stability, or strength, and then we will use contractional tools of isometric, eccentric, or concentric contractions to make a decision on our interventions. So to give you an example on level 2, we'll break it down a little bit more, where we would turn around to the individuals and be like, okay, let's go and coach strict press. What do we see? And then we get people like where they're rolling their triceps and lats out in the barbell. And we're like, what are you trying to affect? And they were like, oh, I want to increase their front rack. I'm like, cool. What's the limitation of the front rack? And they're like, well, I'm not sure. Well, front rack limitation is thoracic extension, shoulder external rotation, supination at the elbow, and wrist extension. So which one of the 4 is their main limitation? And then when we look at that main limitation, okay, well, how do we assess that? We can do thoracic extension assessment by doing lumbar block cat-cow on the floor. So we teach the assessment process. And then what exercises can we do to be able to provide an intervention change for that? So if you were to go to a chiropractor, an osteosports therapist, they'll do an assessment with you in clinic and they'll do a treatment and a reassessment. So we did the lumbar block cat-cow on the floor, for example. Then you might do some exercise for thoracic extension or rotation to increase that range of motion. And you could do a retest. You bring them back into the front rack. You see a positive change. You have done coaching interventions. Then you can go back into your coaching cues or your constraints to then get them into a better position. Then you can drill it. Then you can go back into your autocratic coaching. Then you can do your command control. And then everyone is moving better towards mastery because they've got change. Because if we don't do that, whatever they move like yesterday, it's going to be the same tomorrow, because practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent.
I agree with that. It's interesting. You obviously have to know what's going on. I think some of the struggles out there are the fact that it's like I rarely have athletes that have the time, capacity, or ability to go and like, even if we identify something and say, hey, you need to go do these things on your own to work on that specific thing, do they have the time and capacity to actually get that in? From my experience, it's like if I get you 3 or 4 days a week for an hour and I consistently work with you on those positions, even if we're not doing these one-off drills, if we include general warm-ups that include some of this stuff that everybody's going to do and touch on all of these different positions, from my experience, I've seen some pretty steady progress over time and getting people into better positions. So it's like bridging the gap and figuring out, how do I get them? How do I impact them as much as I can while I have them in class? Give them the tools with the hopes that they can do it and will do it on their own, but potentially knowing that they might just not have the capacity or the time to do so.
For us, these interventions will be done in class and coached. They are coached interventions. Therefore, a CrossFit training program is essential to be able to achieve that. So that means 1 workout a day. So if anyone's not doing 1 workout a day, they don't have the ability to coach through our exercise instructing because it's just too much volume. You're going from A to B. You're You're a Les Mills instructor in a CrossFit gym. Basically, if you follow a lesson plan with a Les Mills instructor, put 2-part workout as well, you basically might as well put the same CD on like Les Mills used to do and stand in front of the class and go 5, 6, 7, 8, because that's exercise instruction. So it has to be 1 workout a day. Now, some days, let's take a Murph workout. That's a long workout. You're not going to get interventions in. So therefore, that's not going to be the intention. But let's say it's Fran today. Fran's a 2-minute workout, 5-minute time cap. There's a lot of time for a lot of coaching. So let's say, for instance, they're there on front thruster, and you know there's a limitation in the thoracic spine. So they're really struggling with this front rack because of thoracic spine. You have the time to really warm people up, even coach them through the skill of the pull-up and scale them through that skill of the pull-up, and develop their thoracic range, which is going to have an effect on the beat swing of the pull-up, effect on the front rack of that barbell. They get interventions and they can then move better. And then at the end of the session, as you cool down to prevent blood pooling and regain length of muscle, you can make the focus around that thoracic extension. And so most of this will be implemented day by day. Now, if you're only seeing that person 2, 3, 4 times a week, it's still going to be a better effect than just making them do the same movement every day.
Yeah, I love that. And that's like, we shout that from the rooftop of 1 workout a day, spend time. And it sounds like to me then that you really use the general warm up and even specific warm up and cool down to really target these things. And the way that we do it at my gym and the way that I see it is like, we're going to do these drills that might specifically impact this, handful of individuals, but everybody's going to get benefit from the thoracic extension drills that we do, regardless, even if that's not some people's limitation. If we do that as a collective and as the group, and we have plenty of time to warm up and go through the teaching of the thruster and the pull-up and the Fran example that you gave, I think that's going to set us up for success. So yeah, I love hearing that. And I think that once again reinforces what we believe, which is the 1 workout a day, spend time really warming up, make sure that every piece of your 60-minute session is intentional and it's useful and it's moving to the end goal, which we talked about earlier, which is ultimately moving better, because that's what shows like somebody's movement quality. And I like the way you described it as mastery, is exactly what we're after over long term, right? So really, really cool with that. Let's see, we've got that question from Allie there. Kabo, you want to pull that up as our last one? Hopefully this can be a quick question. I'm curious to hear it.
Sure. Yeah, she's just curious about the hierarchy of the development of an athlete, because in the gymnastics course, gymnastics is listed before metabolic conditioning. And so the CrossFit theoretical hierarchy of development of an athlete, just so we're all clear, it starts with nutrition at the base, then goes metabolic conditioning, then goes gymnastics.
Cool. Awesome. So as you said very correctly, which helps me a lot, theoretical development of an athlete. And therefore we'll start with that. First of all, theoretical, like slide and filament theory. We kind of know, but it's a theory. Secondly to that, athlete, define athlete. In terms of CrossFit, we'll define athlete because it's still a novice sport, because we don't see mastery in all movements. If we reflect on movements that we see in competition, and then you look at that same athlete in their training, well, do they have the ability to squat with mastery at 80%? Quite often we see this negative effect where the answer is no. They're squatting heavy weight. We can't take away their effort and their development as an athlete. But in terms of a professional athlete, we're going to say anyone compete at the games or semi-finals. Everyone else is a recreational CrossFitter at this point. Therefore, if you complete a needs analysis on those people, that then changes the perspective a little bit. So then we go into the base of it. We do not disagree at all on nutrition. However, when it comes into metabolic conditioning and gymnastics, let's look at metabolic conditioning first. Is the ability to repeatedly do a contraction over and over again for a period of time. Let's say, for example, a plate on the floor, you step on the plate and off the plate. Can you repeat that functional contraction over and over again for an hour and a half? Very much similar to then taking it into running and then cycling and then swimming. But it forgets about biomechanics and the functionality of biomechanics. Therefore, what if someone has just had a car accident? They've got both legs in moon boots, both arms in slings, and they've come into the gym and they're like, look, I was overweight. I need to make a change. The car accident's made me realize I want to do CrossFit. Like, fantastic, come on in. We're going to start with metabolic conditioning. Without tying their head to a ski erg, make them create Metcon. They won't be able to create Metcon unless they have the full functionality of their joints. Now, if someone can't functionally step onto that plate, they can't create metabolic conditioning. So therefore, what we're saying as gymnastics isn't bar muscle up, ring muscle up, handstand push up. Gymnastics is just body weight movement and how you move your body within space. And therefore that includes the functionality to do all of those movements to obtain metabolic conditioning. So in that term, we put it in reverse and we change it around. However, if we do complete the full gymnastics course, you will do programming lecture and you'll have a discussion at the end where we reverse it back, because we need to cover ourselves and have discussions. And therefore that's why it's theoretical. And the point what we add in at the back where we reverse it back around is basically what are the risks of different contractions. So we said about building an isometric base using eccentric loading for strength and positional development. The simple one, what's the risk of eccentric loading? Rhabdo. Therefore we need an effective like range of what we keep our GPP members within. Then I say, what's the risk of isometric contraction? And then the group sits silent for a little bit, and eventually we might put out of them, isometric contractions significantly increase hypertension, blood pressure. Now, how many gym owners take the blood pressure of new members coming into their gym? Which I know the answer is, because I've asked this a lot, and they keep their hands down and no one does this. However, we're not saying that you are a medical practitioner, you have to do this, but it's a screening tool to understand what's going on in that body. You're making effective change to people's bodies. You should understand what's happening. You can't see type 2 hypertension. You can't see type 3 hypertension. Well, sometimes you can see type 3 hypertension, but sometimes you can't. And then that's the key point there. Now, if that person has type 3 hypertension, you're like, don't worry about it. It's Cindy, come on in. We're going to build an isometric base. Before we come into the workout, I want us to accumulate 2 minutes isometric contraction at the top of push-up. So we know where the good shape is through the workout. Well, within that 2-minute isometric contraction, we get myocardial arrest. But actually, we need to consider what else also increases hypertension, and that's going to be high intensity interval training, resistance weight training, isometric contraction, the rest of CrossFit. Right. We're not saying we don't bring these people in. We're saying that we need to know it's a red flag. It's a screening tool. There potentially is a doctor referral with a good discussion saying you need to see your doctor. We need to know that you're just fat, overweight, whatever the problem is. There's no real major underlying health issue in terms of, like, let's say, cancer or like a severe diabetes where this really needs managing with medication. But potentially you need to go and get checked. They may not offer you medication, your decision on that, but this is the place you need to be to bring that thing down. Then they come back in. But when they do come back in, they need to go through low intensity aerobic training for a period of time. Doesn't have to be too long. It might be like 3-4 weeks, where you get them in the gym, you warm them up dynamically with the group, you put them on a bike erg, and they do 3 minutes of low intensity. And then they get off that bike, they do a 300-meter walk around the gym, depends on the size of your gym, and they talk to you, and we call that the talk test. And if they can have a conversation with you, good job, go again. And if they cannot, then we're potentially like, you've done fantastic for today, let's do this again tomorrow. And then eventually over time, you bring down that blood pressure. And that is why we explain that then potentially metabolic conditioning needs to come back in before gymnastics, depending on the needs and assets of the individual. But the real focus there is gymnastics is not bar muscle ups, spring muscle ups. Gymnastics is body weight movement.
Yeah. It's almost like it can sandwich metabolic conditioning, right? You've got to be able to control your body in space before you can even run, row, bike, jump rope, any of that kind of stuff. And then once you can do that, then we can add in the more complex gymnastics.
And then you need a baseline to do that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. Well, this was awesome, man. Really enjoyed it. Don't want to take all your time, but can't wait to hear more about this and to see where you go with your presentations and the discussions at Affiliate Con. I'm excited and kind of hoping that you go up there and go, all right, guys, what do you want to learn? And then we
Me too.
I'd happily do that. If you
question and answer would be awesome. Yeah.
And then just formalize your presentation based on that. But this has been great, man. Where can people find you at that want to learn more other than Affiliate Con?
Okay. So websites are the gymnasticscourse.education or birdboxcoaching.com. You can find us through social media. So it's Birdbox Coaching, Birdbox_coaching, or the Gymnastics Course. Those are the two social media accounts. But you can also email. So if you wish to email about either of them, ask questions, or you want to have a suggestion for Affiliate Con, feel free to do so. The best email for that, both businesses are actually one business. So TGC is Birdbox. It's all under one umbrella. So your best email address to go to is just info@birdboxcoaching.com.
Great. And those are all, Christian put all those in the chat as well.
Cool. Amazing.
Awesome.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in just a couple of weeks. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Appreciate you guys all.
Thanks, guys.
Being on. Yep.
Take care.